Now folks, today I want to play 3 videos. The first 2 contrast the difference between a factual pro-democracy person, Mike Pompeo, and a delusional communist appeasing Jacinda Ardern. Now the third is completely different. It's an interview between Alan Jones, Peter Credlin and the former All Black John Kirwan, which has very high and low moments in it. Anyway, today I'll start this off with Mike Pompeo, who was interviewed by Rowan Dean of The Outsiders. Yes, that small Sky News Australia show. They got the interview for no other reason than being on the right page.
Secretary Pompeo, welcome to Outsiders. You said the other day that the whole world is now waking up to the degree to which Beijing is ideologically and politically hostile to free nations such as ours. Has the coronavirus unwittingly exposed the real face of Chinese communism?
Well, thanks for having me on. And I think that's a central question. My comments the other day reflected what has been decades of Western tolerance of behaviors that we don't accept from any place else. And the nature of the Chinese Communist Party now, I think, has become clear as a result of this coronavirus. Those of us who've been watching this had been talking about this risk to the world. We know the nature of authoritarian regimes. We know what happens when there's not freedom, when journalists can't speak, when you can't have open debate. And then we've watched the Chinese Communist Party also expand its desire to have hegemonic influence around the world, whether that's through the Belt and Road Initiative or other efforts to use government, state-sponsored enterprises to achieve political and defense and security outcomes. Those are the things I think the world could see. It saw that the reflex is to cover up, to hide.
Yeah, to cover up, to hide. That's what our dear leader, Jacinda Ardern, does.
Not to protect and secure and keep safe. Those are the kind of things that authoritarian regimes do by nature, and it's what happened to the world as a result of the coronavirus. And I think countries all across the globe can see that now.
Secretary Pompeo, in late January, the World Health Organization was claiming there was no serious risk, no human-to-human transmission of the virus. But at the very same time, sir, the Chinese government was sending employees of major Chinese firms here in Australia and elsewhere out to empty our shelves of surgical masks and essential medical supplies.
Yeah, and the same happened in New Zealand as well.
Sending tons of critical equipment back to China. What should this tell us about both the World Health Organization and about China?
Well, President Trump has made clear that as we observe the actions of both the Chinese Communist Party and the World Health Organization from at least December through February of this year,
Yeah, now this is the World Health Organization, World Health Assembly. Now this is a draft resolution for an inquiry into the origin of COVID-19. And New Zealand is on this list. Now listen to how Jacinda Ardern plays this down in the upcoming video.
Both tried to cover up what was going on. They knew they had information. They knew there was this risk. We saw them close down Hubei province, but leave open flights to Milan and flights to Tehran, places both greatly impacted, flights to places like New York City, and I'm sure Australia as well. That's not the nature of what good governments do. What governments are trying to protect and defend and secure do is they would alert the world. They would bring in the world's best experts to help them resolve the problem. They would make sure that the entire world had access to the virus samples, access to the laboratories, all the things that would be needed to keep people safe, and they chose not to do that and created enormous risk. And you talk about other activities that were going on. It's also the case that during that same time, the Chinese Communist Party was behaving in ways that protected the people there in China.
Secretary Pompeo, in your superb speech here in Sydney last year, you quipped that you can sell your soul for a can of soya beans. The Victoria Labor state government, aka
the Victoria Communist State Government.
Australia is in the middle of signing up to China's Belt and Road Initiative to the tune of potentially billions of dollars.
Yeah, and I can see exactly the same happening in New Zealand as well.
Despite our federal government's security concerns. The equivalent, I guess, would be if New York signed up to Belt and Road. Two things. As our most important ally, what concerns does this raise for the US and Five Eyes about Australia? And what specific dangers and threats are the Victorian Labor Party exposing Victorians to?
Well, let me take the second one first. Look, every nation has its own sovereign right to make decisions for itself, and I suppose Victoria has some rights that it can undertake. But every citizen of Australia should know that every one of those Belt and Road projects needs to be looked at incredibly closely. It's the case that some of them may just be straight-up commercial transactions. Could be that that's the case. If so, fine. But nearly each one of them has some cost to it. There's often money loaned at concessional rates, or conditions placed in the debt documents, or
conditions like allowing more Chinese immigrants.
Government concessions that have to be made to the Chinese Communist Party in order to get those Belt and Road Initiative projects built. Those present real risk to the people in that region, real risk to your country, and frankly, they build up the capacity of the Chinese Communist Party to do harm in other ways as well. Second, as it relates to the United States and how we think about this, we're doing the right thing to defend and keep America safe and work alongside great partners like Australia to do so. But we will not take any risk to our telecommunications infrastructure, any risk to the national security elements of what we need to do with our Five Eyes partners. We're going to protect and preserve the security of those institutions. So I don't know the nature of those projects precisely, but to the extent they have an adverse impact on our ability to protect telecommunications from our private citizens or security networks for our defense and intelligence communities, we will simply disconnect. We will simply separate. We're going to preserve trusted networks for important information. We hope our friends and partners and allies across the world, especially our Five Eyes partners like Australia, will do the same.
Secretary Pompeo, President Donald Trump, I love his tweets, they're brilliant, great sense of humour. He has tweeted about some wacko in China blaming everyone other than China for the virus. What can you, sir, tell us about the origins of COVID-19?
Yeah. So this is what authoritarian regimes do. They execute broad-based strategic disinformation campaigns to deflect attention from their own failures. They do that so that the world won't see them, but they also do that to maintain power inside their own country so that their own people will continue to be subservient to the Communist Party itself. So disinformation campaigns like this, we've now seen campaigns where they're trying to blame the United States, Europe. I'm sure they've blamed Australia somewhere along the way as well. Here's what we know. This virus originated in Wuhan, China. And the Chinese Communist Party has rigorously prevented the entire world from knowing the precise origins. Who patient zero was, where they traveled, what actually happened inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Exactly.
How did this begin? How did this have the first human-to-human transmission? All of these things the world needs to know. Prime Minister Morrison has been fantastic in calling for an inquiry into this. The 100-plus nations supported that. The United States is fully on board, too. We need to know how this happened. And I want to remind everyone watching this, it's not for political purposes alone that we need to know this. We certainly need to know how the Chinese Communist Party behaved. But we still have real questions about this virus. It's still taking lives all across the world. It's still inflicting enormous economic harm all across the globe. We still have unanswered questions. Our best experts need access to this so they can understand the well springs, precisely where this began, and begin to resolve this problem. And then second, we need to make sure that there have been elements put in place to prevent the next pandemic or the next 10 pandemics from emanating inside of China. There are real risks from these laboratories if they're not managed properly, and the world has the right to make sure that those laboratories that the Chinese Communist Party is operating inside of its country with highly contagious pathogens in the place from where this virus emanated in Wuhan are understood in a way that prevents something like this from ever happening again to the world.
Absolutely, Secretary Pompeo. The Chinese call us a giant kangaroo that serves as a dog of the US. They think that's an insult. We're actually proud to be your ally, and thank you so much for your support of Australia. Thanks for coming on Outsiders.
Yeah, it was good. Anyway, now listen to Ardern cover-up for China.
If I could look at the issue around the WHO and its assembly this week, I think starts today, in fact, is New Zealand supporting the 62 countries, or one of the 62 countries that is pushing for an independent probe into the coronavirus outbreak?
Now you'll notice you'll never say yes it is to that question.
And its origins.
Yeah, so our focus has been just what we can learn as a international community, Corin. So that for us has meant that we've taken a bit of a broader approach.
Broader or narrower?
Our view is there's something to learn from different...
Her buzzword today is learn.
Responses. We learnt a lot from, for instance, the use of lockdown measures by China. And I think the world is the better for having learned from that. Equally, there are places like Taiwan who...
Did you hear that? She said places like Taiwan, not countries like Taiwan. She made that clear for the CCP.
Have managed to successfully contain, and there are things to be learned from that. So we've taken a broad view.
Sure. But are we actually part of that? Because the Australian newspaper is reporting this morning, and others have as well, that we were part of a group of 62 that are pushing for some form of independent inquiry.
We haven't. What I would describe.
Again, she won't answer that question.
Is our view is that there's something that I believe that every country and every probably person in the world would want to look back and learn about what has happened here. What we've been very careful to do is we certainly haven't been taking a view that there is any blame to be apportioned.
So the CCP gets off scot-free. So Jacinda, who's going to pay back our $50 billion debt?
And so that's where I would draw a clear distinction.
Okay, but it is important, Prime Minister, that we know as a country whether our name is part of those 62, because it may be that China, for whatever reason, feels that that's unfair. So we need to know, in terms of the diplomacy, whether we are part of it. Are we?
Yeah. Again, but the fact that we have agreed that we should look at these key learnings, I don't think is anything that anyone would disagree with the need to do that, Corin.
Well, it might not go through, though. I mean, other countries might block it.
I don't think that's a reason not to say we should ask questions as an international community, Corin. I think the idea that this 1 in 100 year event that has caused global economic shock, that has had a devastating impact on the health systems and the lives and livelihoods of people around the world, the idea that we wouldn't want to look into that and learn from that seems surprising to me.
No, sure, and I accept all those arguments. I just want...
Corin, what I'm trying to also portray is that there is some nuance in there that's important. We're not interested in this for blame.
Traitor.
We're interested in it for learning, and I think everyone should be.
No, I completely understand.
Learn nothing, you mean?
This is a very delicate issue. We understand that with there's trade implications in Australia. I'm just trying to establish whether we are part of the 62.
Yes, but again, what I'm trying to highlight here is that's because everyone should be of the view that we should learn from what has happened here.
Okay, and are we also one of the countries that is asking for Taiwan to have observer status at the WHO?
We have supported that as well. Again, for the same reason that I've just outlined, that there are things that we can learn. However, that does not change the position we've had since 1972 around a One China policy.
One China policy?
And so that we're very clear on as well.
I mean, you are clearly being very careful with your language here, and I guess there's good reason, given we can see in Australia that there is trade issues there with their barley, with their beef, with potential tariffs, and the trade minister over there saying that the Chinese aren't responding to calls for a phone call. So how worried are you that there may be some potential trade implications if we take these positions?
No, the reason that I'm being cautious is because it's so often these, the position of New Zealand can well be lost in these conversations, because actually I genuinely do not believe it is helpful in the wake of this that we get into a finger-pointing exercise.
Yeah, and that is because you are an appeasing communist yourself. Anyway, today I'll finish off with Jones, Credlin and Kirwan. Now folks, as you watch this video, you'll notice that John Kirwan starts off very happy. But at the end of the video, he doesn't look very well at all.
Everyone's sick of this coronavirus thing, but the debate has shifted in two directions in a week. One, of course, the astronomical cost of all this to the nation, and we will continue to address that. But we're now being told about a suicide rate possibly increasing by 50% because of all of this. 1,500 additional suicide deaths. Then, of course, you've got the trauma of drought and bushfires on top of all of that. Experts, though they don't have high credibility with me at the moment, experts say that suicide rates could rise by up to 50% due to the economic and social impacts of coronavirus. And listen to this. They're saying suicide will outstrip deaths from the pandemic by a factor of 4. That is, 4 times more people will die from suicide than from coronavirus. Pre-coronavirus, just supposing this, someone's on 90,000 a year. Not a lot of money today, 1,800 a week. The business is told to close down. Part of the lockdown has to do as it's told. The owner says, that's it for me, I won't be back. So the bloke on $1,800 a week is down to $550. What do you do? No wonder this is called the silent epidemic. Youth suicides are forecast to make up almost half the increase. And there's also talk of a generational mental health crisis linked directly to the pandemic. We're now told the federal government wants to lift mental health to a tier 1 issue, and the government has appointed a deputy chief medical officer devoted to the issue of mental illness. Well, from across the ditch, a free new mental wellness app has been launched to help people in these troubled times. It's called Mentemia, which is Italian for My Mind. One of the creators of the app is a bloke whose own battles with mental illness have been well documented, but this is the sobering point to remind us all that mental illness does not discriminate. This man was in his day the greatest rugby union winger in the world, the All Black John Kirwan. I know. My teams played against him. He knew no fear. He's now Sir John Kirwan for the work he's done in this and other fields. Sir John Kirwan played 63 tests for New Zealand. He scored a try in every second test, 35 of them. He's the founder of the Sir John Kirwan Foundation, whose aim is to equip students, young people, with the knowledge and the tools to safeguard and nurture their own mental well-being and help others do the same. He's released the Mentemia app. All the details are on the website. Simple. MENTEMIA. Mums and dads, write it down. MENTEMIA.com. Mentemia.com. And Sir John Kirwan joins us via Skype from New Zealand. Now, I'm a bit confused here with you. I mean, do I have to call you Sir John?
No.
He was... I
should be calling you Sir.
I've got to tell you a lovely story, because in our big clashes with the Wallabies and the All Blacks, John was on the left wing for the All Blacks, and he was fearsome. So I had a young fella, Matthew Burke. He was only 19 years of age, and I said, and he was terrified about defending against John Kirwan. I said, now listen, Matty, just remember one thing. When John Kirwan gets the ball, make sure he gets you as well, but don't be worried if he gets you first. The referee will blow the whistle, late tackle, but it'll be worth it. So we tried to terrorise the great Kirwan. They were good days, John, weren't they?
Oh, they were fantastic days, and I was probably the happiest I'd been in a long time when Matt Burke went to rugby league. And often I talk about Matt Burke, and he gets confused for the fullback, who was also a great player. But Matt Burke was one of the toughest guys I ever marked. So I was pretty happy when he went. I think he went to East back then, didn't he, Alan? I think he went to East Rugby League. I was pretty happy.
Yeah, here we go. Here we go. Don't let them score. There he is. Have a look at this. 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 This is the great Kirwan. Look, and he was quick too. There he is. Well, now, what is less well known is during this remarkable rugby career, John Kirwan was silently battling depression. I read one article that spoke about, quote, anxiety attacks as your, quote, unquote, dark companion for a number of years. Do you remember when the attacks started and what initially triggered them?
Yeah, I think they probably started when I was 13 or 14, but I really didn't take too much notice of them. I used to just put them in a little compartment in my head. And then probably when I started making the Auckland team, 18, 19, they really started coming back. What used to happen with the anxiety is they'd come and it's like just this raw fear. And I'm like, you know, I remember one day I sat in my car after a radio interview and it was like being in a sardine can. And my anxieties back then were these thoughts that I was scared I was going to execute. So this one, I was scared I was going to drive off the Harbour Bridge. And I remember just going into a cold sweat and just sitting there, and I was paralysed for like 20 minutes. And I finally got home and I went to sleep. And when I woke up, I felt okay. And so what I did is I just ignored them and they just kept coming. You know, I had them during test matches. I had them post-test matches. And then, as often can happen, it fell into a full depression. So,
see, John, you know, this is the invisible. This is what we're talking to, John Kirwan, the invisible illness. In August 1991, you said the depression hit ground zero. You'd been on tour with the All Blacks to Argentina, and when you returned home, in your words, you said you fell apart. And I read an article that said he became a prisoner of his darkest thoughts. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't get out of bed, trapped, shaking, sweating and crying. It was the only time he ever missed a game. That was rough stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, I wanted to jump out of a window in Argentina. I was obviously hiding my mental health from the team. I was on an All Black tour, and you've probably been to the Hilton in Buenos Aires, Alan, and I was on the 10th floor, wanted to jump out of the window, and Michael Jones said to me, JK, you've got a good heart. And that saved me. That saved my
Yeah, actually, Michael Jones is a very, very nice guy.
life that night. And I got myself home and finally reached out and got some help. And really, you know, I don't like the word journey, but I started to go on this journey of actually understanding what mental health, and you'll understand this. I mean, you coached. Here was a person like me, you know, I was going to the physio 3 times a week. I was taking anti-inflammatories to play, and yet I would not take any notice of my mental fitness. It was all about physical fitness, and I was just a complete wreck. And finally, I reached out and got help, and sort of started, you know, the journey of getting back to how I feel today, which is thriving.
John, for how long did you hide it? Because many people are frightened to talk about it. Did anyone around you, your family, your teammates, you mentioned Michael Jones, what a great player, did they know what was going on?
No, I mean, that's the whole thing. You know, I could hide it. I could fake it. People didn't know. And I think when you talked about it being a hidden illness, you did right. I mean, you talked before about pandemics. I mean, 800,000 people committed suicide last year around the world. You know, that's also a pandemic. So it's hidden, and that's the problem. If I walked into a room and I saw you next week and I was limping, you'd say, JK, what's up with your knee? But I could walk into those rooms and I could fake it. And that's part of the problem, because it can be invisible. And the secret for me was someone told me it was an illness. I thought it was a weakness. Someone told me it was an illness. And, you know, I think the most important thing for people out there to realise is that, you know, some people are born with mental health conditions, and you know, that's a little bit like what I call type 1 diabetes, and there should be a whole lot of research and money going into that. But there is a whole lot of just normal people that are suffering from anxiety and stress that's pushing them towards the cliff.
Well, JK, let's just go to Peter, because she, at a very personal level...
Yeah, now watch John Kirwan from here on. He seems to go in and out of a very, very dark place.
I know has been through this very recently. Peter?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, my girlfriend lost her 16-year-old son to suicide a month ago. It's taken them a month to be able to bury the beautiful boy Louis today, buried him today in Geelong because of all the restrictions on funerals. And it comes as a spate of suicides in that area, and it's heartbreaking, right? And today, on the online funeral, as we do now because of restrictions, there were over 900 people there. And I think this kid probably thought he didn't have anybody there. Now, his mum and dad, she's a former police officer, so engaged, would talk about these issues, very open, but still he took his life. What can you tell parents? I mean, they thought they were looking at all the right signs, but clearly, you know, sometimes the most engaged parents can still be beaten by this affliction. What do we tell our young people?
I think the most important thing is to keep trying to engage. I think the hardest thing about this invisible illness is it takes away your self-esteem, takes away your self-confidence, and it takes away your enjoyment in life. You feel isolated even though you could have a room of people around you. And so I think the most important thing is just education. You know, it's an illness, not a weakness. But like I said to you, it doesn't matter what people would say. I felt like I was weak and poor and isolated. I felt I couldn't talk to people. And I think the hardest thing about suicide, and this is, you know, my prayers go out to that family, it leaves so much more grief than normal death behind. And, you know, it can leave anger, it can leave, you know, devastation, questions, what more could I have done? But I think the most important thing to think about is that young man, you know, he died of an illness. And, you know, we've got to grieve and celebrate his life because it's unbelievably bad. Unbelievably bad to get with. But I'd just like to say to the parents, you know, it's not their fault. It's no one's fault. It's an illness.
Good on you, JK. JK.
Now watch him get very, very sad here.
Hey, listen, you did wonderful things, JK, on the paddock, but I'll tell you what, this is your finest hour, the contribution you're making because of your status, because of your greatness as an athlete. People start to understand exactly what you're saying. This is non-discriminatory. We'll talk again, John. We'll catch up somewhere, I'm sure, at Eden Park or wherever else. It's lovely to make contact again, albeit these circumstances, but we're deeply in your debt. There he is, John Kirwan. Now, the new app is called Mentemia.